Welcome to my Mustang garage.
Today, we're talking about welding the trunk floor down. Oh, wait a minute, you're way ahead of us. No, I'm not. This is part of the process of welding this trunk floor down. You have to fit the adjacent panel to the panel that you're welding down. You don't want to weld this trunk floor assembly down and have it too far over one way or the other way to where it's going to sit permanently. And the only way to find that is actually put on the next panel next to it, which happens to be the floor pan assembly. There's nothing assembled on this, it's just a floor pan and this seat riser. The seat riser is only on here to add a little weight, so it's sitting on the little stand here I have holding the front end up. But the back end is actually in its location to where it is on the trunk pan is located. It is centered. It is centered to the car itself, along with the rear torque boxes, which have not been put in yet, but it's still centered there. And over here. Plus, you need to find out where the floor goes and joins up with this flange right here that is part of the torque box. To find all this out, you have to install the next part that actually finds the center of this part. Never weld anything down without test fitting the fitment of the part that it's attaching to. You don't have to attach the wheelhouses yet, because the wheelhouses get attached in a different and special way. But as far as the floor pan for the rear trunk floor, it just slots in place in the back right here, and the rails along here, and you can see it's pretty much down flush. There are a couple spots that are higher, and you'll notice that there's a shadow there. That means it's not drawn down yet to be welded. That's why when you weld these floors down, do not just weld anywhere and start in the middle, because what you need to do is start from the point that's fixed. This point is fixed. It's not going anywhere. It's very sturdy and stable, and it's drawn itself down already. It's there. I mean, you can put a weld there right now and you don't even have to push down on it. It's there. That's how it is on most of these. Until you start to get up here and you start to see a shadow. And that's when you need to get your clamps out and start pulling the panel down. And when you pull the panel down, it can make the whole panel move a little bit forward. That's why when you see it right here, and it's really up right in the middle right here, right in the middle of the hump right here, it's really high. That's because it's a natural curve, and you know, the floor pan itself and the frame rails weren't manufactured at the same plant, so they don't know if the curve is exactly the same. But when you weld from this situation, which is going to be back to front, it helps draw the metal down and force it to go in a direction that you're welding. In other words, it's going that way. Do this weld, then naturally this one will start to lay down flatter and go that way a little bit more. Where you see this floor pan actually sit right now, and I put a mark on the floor itself, you may notice this line may disappear underneath the full floor pan that's in place. So never just start willy-nilly welding wherever you want to weld. You got to think of how metal works. Metal expands and contracts. And when you work metal, metal will form to where you're forming it to. So if it's touching tight right here, you work this way. And when you work this way, just don't do the one side. Go to the other side. Since this is all one welded assembly, you want to weld it down as an assembly. So you're going to do these welds right here, the ones that are touching, and still use a clamp to make sure you get a nice tight bond. But this is the closest welds to the rear of the car. And you're going to go and do these 6 right here. Come over here and do these 6 right here. And then come back over here and do a couple more. And go back to the other side. What you're doing is you're trying to draw the whole panel to go that way. In other words, set down flush and flat on either side. This keeps the metal in the position you need it to be in, and it keeps the car in square. The reason why we have to set up the next panel is to find the position of this. You don't want to weld this down and go to put this panel on and say, oh my gosh, it's way off. It won't even fit in here between this rear torque box bracket and this hump right here. Or it's so far over that it's hitting right here, and now you have to notch it right here, which throws off the whole center of the car. So always, and this is Joe Daddy's saying, test fit, test fit, test fit. I got that from him years ago, watching all his videos, and we did the same thing when he welded the cross member in on this rear frame rail right here, and we always test fitted the adjacent part first. So always see if everything lines up really nice. This is not welded down. This is not screwed down. It's just laying here with just a couple clamps on here to know where this part is supposed to be located, where it must be located on both sides, and center it up. And once you do that, you can center up the rest of the car. And now look at this. The pan's not even welded down yet, but you can see the shock tower, the shock hole is completely center of the shock hole of the pan. And we'll go to the other side, and I'll show you the other side and how centered it is over there. It's centered in the hole in the cross member underneath. Now these cars do have location markers that the car was built in, and they use jigs at the factory to locate certain mounting points of this car to build it in a jig. Now this floor pan has a hole here, and many people think it's a drain hole, and yes, it can be used as a drain hole, but that's not why that hole is there. That hole is there for a steel spike that went through the frame rail and up through there to locate the floor. And I'm going to show you what I mean. Just like that. What you're seeing is a chisel coming through the bottom of that, all the way through the frame rail and through into the floor. Why is that important? Because let's get in there closer. That hole has to be centered. This hole has to be centered to the frame rail that's underneath, because that's where they mounted everything. That's how they found the center of this panel right here. This panel is in its location. Then you come over to the other side and you'll see it's also centered. It's hard to focus, but that's also centered. And you could actually take a plumb bob and go straight down through here, and you'll find it's centered from this hole to that hole. And if you look at this, you'll be like, oh, they misstamped it, the hole's not centered here. No, that hole is not here to be centered with anything but the body itself. This goes all the way through, and that's the way the car was put together at the factory, through guide pins that held certain spots of the car. Now I'm going to show you another spot on this car that's also important, and the reason why I have not put the torque box, there's a upper torque box that goes here and curves down and goes right here, which is this plate right here. The reason why that's not on the car yet, there's another measurement. And I'm not doing this measurement underneath the car because it's much easier to do it from the top side of the car. This hole right here, where you see the bracket welded in underneath to find side to side when we put the frames together, is also used to find out how far this floor goes forward, because there's also another mounting point. Now let me take this pan off and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now, let me put this aside. Now, this hole in the lower torque box, which is going to be at the most underside of the car on the frame itself, down here, you're going to see that from the center of this hole, and you go straight all the way over, and you go to the center of this hole, it's another guide pin just like in the back of the car. This, from here to here, has to be a perfect measurement. And then when you do that, you can take something that goes in the hole, either be a pen or something, give you a nice point to clear, you know, the hump of the car and stuff like that. And then you can measure from this hole to that hole and do the same thing from the outside to that side to find out if this floor is square. The last thing you want to do is have the floor go off one way or the other when you weld this part on next, because these aftermarket panels are not perfect and you have to double check everything. It's like right here, I got a big gap right here, and the panel actually goes and kind of goes in like this, and it's not square. How do I know it's not square? Get a square. This panel right here is perfectly square. It's square that side, and if you go to the right there and go right here, that is perfectly square right there. But this sheet metal right here was not cut square. It's still usable. You just have to look for things like that. Do not trust where they cut these panels to be in a perfect spot. But I will tell you, the most important spots on a car that are supposed to be important are important, and they do make sure they're in the right spot. This hole is in its right spot. This hole will be in its right spot. Why? Because this is Ford's picture of how this car goes together. And if you look right here, here's that hole in the rear frame rail, the little small hole in the back. Then you go all the way up here to, hold on a second, it's wanting to get blurry on me, hold on. Then it's wanting to go here to this hole, which is on the front frame rail floor support. And that hole, from there to here, there's actually a measurement right here, and it says 42.5 inches. 42.50. Now, you can go by just that, but if you're under the car and you don't see it, the same hole is on the frame rail underneath the car. That's the exact same mounting hole that the factory used to locate these floors on the mounting jig when they're putting these cars together originally. And by Ford's own decree, this is the only part of the car that can be reproduced to make sure these parts go on the way Ford wants them to go together. In other words, this hole in the frame rail and this hole in the floor pan under the passenger seat here, well, it's where the passenger seat feet goes, but you get the idea. That's a hole. It's not a drain hole. You can use it as a drain hole, but as you noticed, I said it was 42 inches and 42.5 inches. Sorry if I'm blurry, I gotta use my hands. And when you measure this, when you measure these, do not measure at an angle like that. It will throw the measurement all the way off. Go from the hole, go from the center of the hole just like this, put it straight down, go all the way across the floor, just like that, and make sure you're where you want to be. That's 42.5 right there. And you're not looking for square, but what you're trying to do is measure from 42.5, which is right here. And you'll notice 42.5 is center. Let me put it on there and I'll show you. As you can see, 42.5 is very, very, very close to center on here. But when you're putting this panel on, this is the panel you want to be at 42.5 exactly. The floor can be off just a little bit, but that's the most important measurement part. And that will determine where this floor support gets welded to the bottom of the car here. Then you're like, well, how do we know how far apart these floor supports go? Well, the floor supports are also measured. It says it right here. 29.88 from the center of that same hole to the center of that hole is 29.88. And that's when you would take these and separate them out, and you'll measure from center of that hole to the center of the other hole, side to side, and you'll know how far it is from this side to this side. Those frame rails must be apart to go onto this floor pan. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That is part of a different video of when I'm going to be installing the transmission cross member and the floor supports onto the floor pan. Also, the upper pan and the lower pans for the convertible get installed almost all at the same time, because this panel right here gets welded to that panel, and that panel there gets welded to that panel, and this panel, the floor panel here, gets welded to this, that, and that. And you have to treat it all as one. You can't put one part on where you want to and hope the other parts line up. You have to put it all together and measure. That's what these Ford factory measurements are meant to do, is find diagonals, spaces, width, and height. And they have all these measurements just for this car, and only use the ones in the book. The ones online, I've seen the numbers change because people like to modify and screw up other people. Get them in an original book or get a certified copy of an owner's, not owner's manual, but a shop manual. Make sure you get a good one, and you'll see frame measurements for LTDs and Comets and all these other Fords that are in this book also. But remember, Mustang and Cougar were built on the same assembly line, and there we're going to have Mustang and Cougar measurements. Read only the Mustang if you have Mustang, but read the Cougar if you have a Cougar. So, our next step is to actually find the center of that, which we already did. And what you can do to make sure it's okay side to side, and in other words, it's center of the frame here, center of the frame there, get a little pocket roller like this. They're a couple bucks, and I think you can get them at Harbor Freight, but they're only a couple bucks anywhere. And it has a slide on here. And these are very important because they can help you. So I'm going to find a reference point, and it's at this bracket right here and this edge. So I'm going to measure from this bracket to this edge, and I'm going to be on the flat side on this side of the bracket on the frame itself, and just slide this rule over, and you'll have a depth. A depth actually determine how far this floor actually goes in from that side, from the edge to here. You just come over to the other side, find that bracket on the other side, go up here and just slide it up, and you'll notice it's darn near perfect. If it's too far over, like a quarter of an inch, you could always, make sure the clamps are up, push it over a little bit, clamp it back up, measure it again. You just want to measure it and make sure this is side to side where you need it to be. Wherever this goes side to side, this panel will also follow. But the more you set up this panel and this panel together, it's going to naturally want to try to find its center here also. Me measuring with this, going through here and seeing if it's this depth is the same on both sides, is only confirming that I'm in the right position and I'm okay to go ahead and start welding the floor. But before we weld the floor, I have another issue to talk about. And I'm talking about these panels right here, which is the brackets I showed you in the last video. In the last video, I showed you where they go and how they go in. And I also said you can't put these in until you start welding the floor. The problem is you have to slip this floor on over the frame to get this floor on. Then you can put this in, and weld this in. But it creates another problem. If you start welding these up and weld the whole floor down, you'll never get these in. Not unless you cut this tab off. And you don't want to cut this tab off because it's the tab that goes to the frame rail itself. And you don't want to cut it off. So, before you start welding here, on this side or that side, you're going to need to put these in. And they go in from the underside, and they go up this part. I'm sorry. This part right here goes above the frame rail, and it gets wedged kind of like this. Let me get a piece of sheet metal and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Here's a little piece of sheet metal. If you can just imagine the frame rail, the top of the frame rail slides in just like that. You want it like this. This is the top of the frame rail, and this gets wedged in there like that. To get it in here, you may have to flex this a little bit and lift up a little bit here, to get underneath there and get this wedged in like that in the position where the frame rail is literally on the top. Where the bracket is on top of the frame rail, and it goes in like that. Just like that. So, I would show you on camera, but it's a very awkward angle. It's underneath the car. But what you're trying to do is just put them in place like this. And I actually, as you remember from the last video, I put pilot holes, and there's the pilot holes there. And I put a measurement, I put some markings here on which way the bracket goes. So we know it goes in like this. So go ahead and put those two brackets in. Don't weld them. Just put them in. Just put them in position. You're going to weld them later. You're just getting them in now so you don't have to fight with them later or modify them to fit. We're trying to put this car together as close as possible the way Ford did. The only difference with this and me and Ford putting this car together, I believe this pan was not put on until this was already welded here. And they just welded everything with spot welds going forward. And they did their own jig setup. But because this is a pre-made one-piece trunk floor pan, you get what you get. And you have to deal with what you get. And you're gonna have to learn a different assembly process, the way Ford did it, the way you want to, and the way it should be. So, last thing, don't weld them in, just set them in place. Just set them in place like that on both sides, and then we can start welding the floor. Now, we're not welding anything, and these are only here to keep the floor floating right now. And always use clamps, and I have these bigger clamps right here that can go around this whole frame rail right here and clamp it down. Luckily there's no gas tank in here, and we can clamp from this side without having to get the oversized clamps out. And then when it comes over here, we can basically finish all the way down. So the next step you'll see me is showing you the brackets in place, these brackets in place. Okay, I went to go put these end brackets in, and I came into a little problem. The new frame rails are a little bit, the flange, the top flange of the frame rail is a little bit wider than what they should be, and a little bit thicker also. So when I was trying to put them in there, it was holding it back to the point where it was making, instead of the piece going in there straight, because it was holding it back right here, it was making this whole piece go like, you know, a little cockeyed, not sitting in there straight, because it wouldn't go any further than this. This is the most important flange right here. This is where you want to go against the frame rail tight. And this flange over here goes on the trunk floor drop off. And this flange gets sandwiched in between, but because it's holding it back. So I marked it maybe about a little less than 1/4 of an inch, and about 1/8 of an inch I'm going to take off from this top of here, right here, and a 1/4 inch right here. And I'm just going to use a roll lock with an aggressive 36 inch, because I'm not taking off a lot of material for a cutoff wheel, and cutoff wheel would be hard to get in there. I could probably do this one with the cutoff wheel, but this one would be tough because I would have to make sure I'm not cutting through this and then cutting through this. So it's easier just to slowly grind it away with the roll lock and get the dimensions that we need to get so this piece can fit in. Now while I was at it, I test fitted the other side and found the same exact problem. And this one's a little bit further down, but it's okay. And this one's not as bad. So it's about a little over 1/8 of an inch. I'm only going to the yellow line, not past the yellow line. And I might just go a little bit into the yellow line a little bit, just to make sure it's not making contact. Last thing you want to do is have a noise in your car because something's rubbing. You know, you hate to have a chirp, 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 chirp every time this car flexes a little bit. These cars are meant to have a little bit of leeway, and make sure these parts fit. And you will have to trim. I guarantee you there won't be one part on this car you will not have to fit, trim, or do something to manipulate whatever it is to take to make these work as they're intended to work. So right now I got a little bit of trimming to do, and then I'll put the pieces in. I'll show you how I got those in. Now you can see that I got the boxes put in here. Get better light on it for you. They're in there now. As you can see where I'm pointing this at, that flange was a lot wider than it should be. It's okay. I just notched this out a little bit more to go around that flange because it was stopping it from going in and being flush. And now it's in its place. As you can see, the tabs on that side. As you can tell, I'm having a hard time positioning this camera so you can see the tab on that side is darn near close to it. And I'll show you the important part of that drill bit, 1/8 inch drill bits that I put in place to locate them earlier. Wow, this will not focus. Save my life. It's wanting to focus on the white things back there. Well, anyway, there we go. The 1/8 inch drill bits that I did a pilot hole to when I test fitted the brackets when it was upside down will help you guide it back into place. Because you can see it gets sandwiched between the back panel here and the trunk floor. And it has to go in between there, and it's very hard to see where you need to be unless you put a guide pin in there, and it has to be in there, and it goes here underneath the frame rail itself. So it has to be sandwiched in between there. It's a little bit tough, but once you get it in position and you have those in on both sides, let's get to the other side and I'll show you that. I actually did the same thing. As you can see, it's sandwiched in between the back panel and the floor. And I have they're just drill bits. I put a piece of tape on them so the drill bit don't go all the way through. And let's look at the other side, inside the frame rail. And you can see that one's also in position. Now you know why I'm not going to weld it until after the car is upside down. Most of this can be welded, but against the frame rail where this support is for the jig, it's in my way. So I can do the outside edge right here and the bottom side edge here, and I can drill these. When I get these welded on the side here, when I get these welded on the side here, and I get the bottom edge welded here and down here, let me tilt it up so you can see. There's 3 holes at the bottom here. That holds in that bracket. Now I'll take a spot weld cutter, make the hole much bigger, and then do plug welds here and here to hold that bracket in on the frame rail itself. And then I'll come in and do what I can do. And then we'll be ready to start but welding the floor down. But these brackets have to go in place first. It's not welded in. They're just being held in with guide pins right now. And they're in place. They're just in place being held in by these guide pins. That's it. The only reason why we're doing that is because I have to be able to move this, lift this floor up a little bit off the frame rail to get that bracket in between the frame rail and the floor. So very important to put this bracket, the convertible bracket in first before you start welding this down with clamps and welds and everything, because you'll never get that in there unless you cut the tab off, and I don't want to compromise the safety of the back of the car, especially back here where the bumper meets on. This is a very important part of the structure. My view is if you have to cut out something that's not supposed to be cut out, you're taking your chances of having a problem in that area in the future. So in order of this having to be done this way, in other words, loosely put in, just put it in place, then weld the floor down, and then weld that on. In other words, you need to get it all set up first to weld, just like I did up here with the floor pans. I need to make sure that these are in their position too. So very important to make sure every component that you're welding together is going to weld together the way it's supposed to be. You always have to look 3 steps ahead when building a car. It's not just as simple as welding a panel in and saying, well, the next part can go on. You'll find out you can't get the next part on unless you figure out how that next part goes in before you commit to the first part going down. Same thing with torque boxes in the front. I know of only 2 ways to put those torque boxes in, and one is putting them in one piece, and the other way is separating them into 2 upper and lower parts and putting them in separately. But on this car, I'm going to actually show you how to do both. It can be done with the firewall in place and without the firewall in place. I'll show you that later, much later. But right now, got those side brackets in. I showed you how they go in, where they go in, why they are there. And let's get the floor welded. I have a Lincoln 180 welder. It's a 240 setup, or 230 or 220, or whatever you got in your area. And these cords on here are not very long. My first time using this, I went to go wheel it and didn't realize, hey, I only have 6 feet. And I almost pulled this out of the wall. Luckily, I had somebody here, I think it was Barry, and he showed me, hey, you're about to pull that out the wall. Just make sure you have a very heavy duty extension cord that's made for that. Do not make one up. This one I bought on Amazon. It is UL rated. It is for the plug that I need to have the plug for, which is small slot, big slot, and ground. That is for a welder plug. And that's the welder plug there. Small slot, big slot, ground. And I have a fresh tank of gas, and this is my welding gas, shielding gas, and we'll get ready to start welding in a few minutes. But now there's prep we have to do for these welds before we can actually weld. I have to take a grinder, take out these burr edges where I drilled it, and I'm going to show you how to do a couple of welds and how to make sure they're flat. And the secret of getting a fresh weld that's flat, that minimizes your grinding. You can be a very bad welder and have a mound built up here, and you can be a very good welder to where it's so flat already, all you have to do is just scuff it and you're ready to paint. I'm in between. I always have a little mound, just a little bit, but I'm going to show you the best way to help you get a fresh bead in there and plug weld the proper way. And it involves bare steel.